Okay, here, Metal Boys. Look at this. The Metal Boy shirts are now on sale. Just go to the video description to find out on how you can purchase one. Metal! The Metal Boys! Yeah! The Metal Boys! Welcome back to the Metal Boys. Bob Daisley, Black Sabbath, Ozzy, Gary Moore, Rainbow.
Oh my gosh.
Uriah Heep. The list goes on and on and on.
Mother's Army. You can name them. There's so many. Yeah.
And the reason
always
why...
a pleasure to have Bob on with us. It's
always nice to talk to you guys. You know, you're good lads.
Today the big question is,
yeah,
and this is being respectful to my favorite guitarist of all time. That's Randy Rhoads.
Mm-hmm.
The legacy. What if, because his life was cut so short and it was such a tragic event, he never really got to flourish. So the question becomes, what if? What if Randy Rhoads never got on the plane and he was still with us? So that's why we're having here to pick your brain to see what could have been, what would have been. I get it, Bob. What if this and what if that? But it's just a fun exercise to remember the legacy of Randy Rhoads.
Yeah, the word "if" is a tiny little word with such a big meaning. You know, there's so many people over the years that have said things like, "Oh yeah, if he hadn't done this, and if he hadn't done that, and if he hadn't got on that plane, and blah blah blah." You know, but as my dad used to say, if anybody said "if" in that context, he'd say, "Yeah, and if me auntie had balls, she'd be me uncle."
Yeah, yeah.
Kind of sums it up. You know, it's like Randy's brother Kelly. Even he said it. He said, "Yeah, well, if Randy hadn't got on that plane, he might have walked across the road to get a can of pop or something and got hit by a bus or a truck or whatever." You know, you are where you're going to be when it's your time.
Yeah.
And my grandfather had a saying for that as well. He said, "If I knew where I was going to die, I wouldn't go there."
Simple as that, yeah.
If we break down the reasons why most artists break up or bands break up, you break it into three categories. Financial, getting along together as a group, and pursuing your musical endeavors, right?
If I can answer for Bob, getting paid, right, Bob?
Well, that helps.
That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah. As a teenager, when I first started playing it, the main thing for me was I did it because I loved the music. You know, I remember at the time, and we're talking in the 60s, some young kids were learning to play guitar because they thought, "Oh, I can get famous, or I can get lots of girls, or I can make lots of money, or whatever." I didn't really think about any of that stuff. It was just music for me, you know. So there are lots of reasons that people get into it, and I'm 100% sure that Randy's was music, because he was born into that environment. That was what he came into the world into. His mother was a musician. She had the music school, and she meant so much to him. You know, she was very important to him. And I'd heard it from Kelly, his brother, about when Randy first brought home tapes of what we were doing with the Blizzard of Ozz, that she wasn't really impressed with what Randy had done or what the band had done when he was with Quiet Riot. But when he started with us and we were writing together and we had tapes of stuff we did, and when he played that to her, apparently she said, "Randy, this is more like it." And he cried with sort of tears of joy and acceptance and relief and all the rest of it, because he'd pleased her and she was really, really important to him.
I think that's one of the main points. Ozzy let him, as well as you and the rest of the band, pursue his musical endeavors in the band. He allowed himself to express himself musically. Correct?
Well, we became the correct, or the ideal environment for Randy to be in and to shine and to become himself and break out of any restrictions, and you know, he just, you could see him developing as we progressed. You see that it was a heavy band, and he hadn't been in a heavy band before. You know, Lee Kerslake from Uriah Heep, heavy band. Ozzy from Sabbath, heavy band. I'd just come out of Rainbow, a heavy band. So it was, he was surrounded with people that were really the right environment for him to be in, to start to develop and shine, and obviously we had an influence on him as he had an influence on us.
Did you ever find that he felt stifled playing the same songs night after night on tour?
Well, I only did one tour, Randy, and that was the UK tour. And at that point, and that was in 1980, at that point, we only had the songs from the first album. We'd only done one album, so there were a couple of bits and pieces in the set that we had to stretch out. Like he did a longer intro for Crazy Train, and a guitar feature thing in another song, and just to make the set sort of an hour, a quarter hour and 20 long. Randy didn't like doing the Sabbath stuff. He wasn't a Black Sabbath fan. It wasn't. It just wasn't his taste. Wasn't his cup of tea. But so he kind of resented having to play that, and the sooner that he didn't have to play that, the better for him. But they were very early new days when we did that first UK tour. But the second tour I can't really comment on because I wasn't on it. You know, Lee and I were ousted from the band, and then they carried on with the touring band. But I don't know about Randy's playing the same stuff every night. I think there were variations that would keep it interesting anyway. You know.
You know, it's interesting. In Rudy Sarzo's book, and in Kelly Garney, and as well as his brother Kelly, you know, you mentioned he wasn't a fan of Black Sabbath to begin with, right? He wasn't even a fan even before he joined Ozzy, right?
That's it.
He wasn't really into auditioning for a Black Sabbath type band.
Right. It was only really when we began working and writing together and coming on what we were coming up with, that he became more at home doing what we were doing, sort of thing. You know, if he'd had to join the band and just play Black Sabbath stuff, I don't think he would have joined. I don't think he would have done it. Gary Moore was Ozzy's first choice when he got first asked to leave Sabbath, and he had to get his own thing together. His first choice was Gary Moore, but Gary didn't want to work with Ozzy. He said, "No, he'd just come out of Thin Lizzy, and Phil Lynott was sort of a little messed up on drugs and alcohol and all the rest." He said, "I've just left one. I don't want to work with another one straight away, you know." So what Gary said was, "I'll help you find a good guitarist, and I'll tell you who's good and who isn't if you want my input." So that's what Gary did. But Ozzy had seen Randy play in LA, and he apparently, I wasn't there, but he said, "Okay, you've got the gig." But then when he went back to the UK, he was going to get a different band together without Randy in it. Because I got the phone call from David Arden at Jet Records, and he said, "Will you catch a train up and have a play with Ozzy? And he's got a couple of people up there, blah, blah, blah." You know, so I jumped on the train from London. Ozzy picked me up at Stafford railway station, and he had two other guys there, a guitarist and a drummer. So at the end of our little session together, Ozzy and I were in his kitchen having a cup of tea, and he said, "Well, you know, what do you think? Blah, blah, blah." Ozzy and I got on great straight away. Immediately, there was definitely a rapport there. You know, it was instant. And I said, "Yeah, I'd like to work with you, Ozzy. This is obviously feels good." I said, "But I'm not, to be honest with you, I'm not too sure about the other two guys. They're nice guys, they're good players, but are they world class?" And he said, "Hang on a minute." He walked out. I heard him call out. He had a sort of little rehearsal room built on integrally on his house, and he walked in there and he said, "You can pack up, fellas. It's not working. You can go." That was then gone.
Time to leave.
Just because I But if I'd been a yes man and said, "Oh, okay, I'll do whatever you want, let's do it," blah blah blah, there would be no Randy Rhoads, and there would be no that version of Blizzard of Ozz, you know. So he said, "I saw another guitarist in LA. He's really good. He teaches music at a school." And I said, "Well, who's that?" And he said, "Oh, his name's Randy Rhoads." Well, when he said he teaches music at a school, I sort of visited an older bloke with pipe and slippers and glasses or something. But he said, "No, he's a young whiz kid." And I said, "Well, let's get him over." And that's how it started. Just me and Ozzy in his kitchen. And then he phoned Jet Records then, and he spoke to Arthur Sharpe. He was the one who introduced Ozzy and me at a gig in London. And Ozzy phoned Arthur, and he said, "Oh, Bob and I get on like a house on fire. The fire brigade's just left." That's what he said. It was just. But he said, then we asked David Arden then, who was taking care of the day-to-day management, and we said, you know, can we fly this guitarist over that Ozzy saw in LA? And he wouldn't at first. He didn't want to. He said, "Well, he's unknown. He's a kid. Nobody knows who he is. He's got no reputation. We'd rather keep the band UK based and blah, 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 you know." So, but after a while, he relented and he said, "Well, okay." And I still remember his words. He said, "Against my better judgment, I will fly this kid over." And he got Randy over, and we met up in Jet Records late 79. I think it was about November 79. And that's when Randy and Ozzy and I went up on a train together to Ozzy's house. Well, I think we only stayed 1 or 2 nights. It might have been just one night, that first night. And Randy and I had a play together with a friend of Ozzy's that was sitting in on drums. He wasn't really considered for the gig, but he was a friend of Ozzy's, and he could play and keep a beat. So we just had a little jam with him. And at the end of the first jam, Randy and I looked at each other, and we virtually said the same thing at the same time, like, "Oh, good playing," or "I like you playing," or something like that it was. But we said it together at the same time to each other. So we knew then straight off, well, this is going to work. You know, it feels good. It feels right. And so we carried on auditioning drummers then, and we began writing the first album. When it came to music, we were all on the same page. We all loved, you know, the stuff that was very influential on us. You know, Jeff Beck, Jimi Hendrix, Cream, Zeppelin, all those sorts of bands. And Randy loved Uriah Heep, the Uriah Heep album, Demons and Wizards. That was one of his favorites.
Yeah. And with Gary Moore, G-Force being on Jet Records, would that have been an influence for Ozzy, or was Ozzy aware of Gary beforehand, or is it because they were on the same label that he thought that might be a good fit?
No, he knew what Gary was like. I mean, Gary was an amazing player, a very, very reputable guitarist, and you know, then that just the name Gary Moore, that was a credential of you know, it was impressive.
Yeah.
So, you know, to have Gary in your band, well, to be honest with you, I don't think that would have lasted very long. The situation between Gary's personality and Ozzy's personality, you know, having worked with them both myself, I'd say that it probably wouldn't have worked for very long anyway.
But getting back to Randy, and was he fulfilled musically? Because later on, when you weren't in the band, and they asked him to do "Speak of the Devil," which was all Black Sabbath material, maybe he was feeling like he wasn't able to grow musically. But when you were in a band with him, did he feel like he'd express himself every which way possible musically?
Yes, and Kelly, his brother, told me that when he first came home with the tapes, the rough mixes of Diary of a Madman album, he sat in the driveway in his car playing it over and over and over. So he loved it so much. So it was like, you know, I've done something that I'm proud of here, and so he should have been. It was a good album that we worked well together.
Did he tell you? What about classical music? I mean, I know Kelly said that he wanted to pursue classical music studies. His
Yeah,
mother
well, that's
said
when he wanted to
that.
get his master's degree. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the fact that Ozzy had punched him didn't really help the situation either, because
And that was over. I think the punch was over "Speak of the Devil" and wanting to do. He didn't want to do all Black Sabbath material, which Alan, what was he contracted for that?
well, he agreed to do that album as an out. He wanted to get out and not be in the band and go and pursue his classical training and get his master's degree. So he agreed to do that album as part of the deal of, okay, if I do this, see ya. And that's what it was basically.
Yeah, now Ozzy and Sharon was hoping that he changed his mind somewhere along the road, but
I think his deal was he went, and according to Rudy Sarzo now, right? We weren't there.
Mm-hmm.
Rudy Sarzo said he goes, listen, I'll do the Black Sabbath album. I'll do one more studio album, one more tour, but then I'm out.
Yeah.
And Ozzy took
I
a
think that
fig.
sounds about right, because Sharon came to me and asked me to do a third album. When Lee and I were ousted, I got the phone call. It was only about 6 weeks later. It's in my diary. And I was asked into a meeting with Sharon and talked to and offered a deal to do the third album. Now, I wanted to work with Ozzy and Randy again, so I agreed to do that third album, because even though Lee and I were suing Jet Records and Don Arden, Sharon and Ozzy were helping us in our case. So I thought, well, I'll because she'd had a fallout with her father by then. So I said, yeah, okay, well, I'll do the third album. I was looking forward to doing the third album. I was going to stay with Uriah Heep, because Lee and Mickey Box and I had reformed Uriah Heep by then, and that was starting to go quite well. And I was going to stay with Uriah Heep, but go in, write, and record the third album with Ozzy, Randy, and Tommy Aldrich. And that was the plan.
I mean, it's interesting. How do you think Bark at the Moon would have been? Like, you did the lyrics, right? You did all the lyrics for Bark at the Moon, at least the majority.
Not just lyrics.
No, music as well.
Yeah, I co-wrote music as well. There were parts of songs that were mine, and I remember when we rehearsed in New York in writing the stuff with Jake when he first came in the band. At the end of that 6 weeks in New York, we were going back to England to finish writing and start recording. But we were in a room together, and there was Ozzy and me and Jake and Tommy Aldrich and someone else. And I said to Jake, just to make him feel comfortable, because they were hard shoes to fill, Randy's shoes. To walk into those in that situation was must have been some pressure, and he knew the spotlight was on him. So I just wanted to make him feel a bit more comfortable and know that it was working out well. And I was impressed with Jake. I thought he was a great player and he had great ideas. And I said to him, Jake, I think you're working out great. Your riffs and the ideas you've got, because he had things ready to bring into the situation beforehand. He said, yeah, but you turn them into songs. And that's what he said to me. I thought, well, that's great.
It's true. But what would have been what do you think the output would have sounded like if Randy was there? And I mean, you did the lyrics, so the song lyrics would have been the same. The melodies probably would have been the same.
Yeah, I would say the lyrics would have been, well, depending on.
This is the what if now. This is the what if, right? What if
you
sat down with Randy and did Bark at the Moon?
Right. It probably would have been a completely different album, because he was a different player to Jake, and it was usually the guitarist of the band that sort of was very influential on the direction of songs and the ideas and that. But unless I had a riff or a part that started the song or whatever, but the guitarist usually gave direction to the music and the songs, and Randy being such a different player to Jake. See, Jake made those songs his. He played the Randy stuff, but he made them his. He didn't play it exactly like Randy, and that he had his own personality, and he put his stamp on them. But they were two different players, and both brilliant players.
Yeah. What about Randy and the finances? Do you think, I guess you could only, I'm not sure what you know and you don't know, was he paid fairly in the Aussie camp?
That I do not know. I don't know. And put it this way, I can't really comment, but nothing would surprise me. But let's put it that way.
Well, it seems like the family seems okay.
Good
You know,
and bad.
Kelly and Kathy, which are amazing people, the siblings, which we've spoken to before. You know, they seem like they're in good relationship with the Osborne. So I would assume that it's decent, right? It's always been somewhat.
Don't.
Right?
Well, I can just say, don't assume.
Don't assume.
Make no assumptions.
If anybody's read Bob's fantastic book, For Fact's Sake, they would understand that we should never assume when it comes to the Osborne. So, you know, if we're doing the what if game, if we take it a step back, and I was rereading your book last night, I just couldn't put it down.
Right.
You know, if Andrew Aycock never left the Rainbow Tour to go join Aussies, right? If we're going to play the what if game, he was the bus driver that. And in your book, I was surprised that you were there when Blackmore kicked him off the tour for Rainbow.
Well, I remember when Lee Kerslake and I were with Uriah Heep, we did an overnight drive and ended up at the Hyatt House in the Riot House in LA. And it was like 8 o'clock in the morning. We got there and we'd been asleep on the bus, and we said, let's go up to Ben Frank's and get some breakfast. So we walked out of the hotel and there was Richie. And we said, well, we're going up to Ben Frank's. Do you want to join us? But he told us about Aycock and what he thought. And he said that he saw dark energies around him. He said there was something going on there, which is why he took him off as driver on the Rainbow Tour. I didn't know that before then, but Richie told me himself. So, but I can't think of Aycock being the main cause or the reason that happened. The only thing, the logical thing, is that the autopsy showed that the seamstress, the wardrobe lady, what's her name?
Rachel
Youngblood.
Youngblood,
yeah, Rachel Youngblood had a heart attack. Now, that plane was a dual control, meaning that it had pedals and controls on both sides, and she was sitting in the front with the pilot, with Randy in the back. And there were apparently struggles going on in the plane. So we don't know if she'd had the heart attack during the flight and stamped on the controls, or didn't know what she was doing because of the heart attack and threw the plane into a dive. And those V-tail planes are very hard to pull out of a dive, apparently. And that's one theory. But you know, nobody can say for sure what really happened other than those three that were in the plane. But I mean, that at least sounds logical and makes sense.
Yeah, because in Rudy Sarzo's book, he alludes to the fact that he was surprised that Rachel was on the tour because her health hadn't been very well. And he said, well, if she's with us, hopefully she'll be able to get through the tour. But he was quite concerned that because of her health, that maybe she wouldn't. And little did he know at the time.
Yeah. And Randy didn't like flying. That I knew that for sure. He didn't. But he wanted to take some pictures of the bus from the air. And Rachel said, well, I'm going up. And I've asked the pilot to take it easy because I've got a heart condition and blah, blah, blah. And so he was supposed to be flying gently, not buzzing the bus. So that doesn't make sense, the buzzing the bus thing, you know. So, I mean, logically, it looks with what information's available, it looks like that she could have had the heart attack in the flight, during the flight, and being a dual control plane, interfered with the controls on her side and sent it into a dive. But we don't really know.
You know what's fascinating to me?
What?
Randy was, you know, by the time he was in Ozzy leading up to Speak of the Devil, he wasn't really happy anymore. It seems that even with Rudy Sarzo with him, his good friend, right?
Yeah.
You know, he was asked to go on Quiet Riot and play a solo on Thunderbird, the song Thunderbird.
Right.
the album hadn't really taken off yet. It wasn't actually even released.
Right.
I think if he would have played on Thunderbird, he might have stayed with Quiet Riot, maybe like with Ozzy and Quiet Riot. I have this feeling like maybe, and yeah, it's classical music as well, but once he would have reconnected with these guys he grew up with, that's
well,
how Rudy.
I think, yeah, because they were his, his mates, they were his buddies.
Yeah.
So if they'd have had any sort of success, that would make it viable for him to leave and go back, then that is a possibility. I would say that if he did that solo and it turned into a successful release, I'd say that he probably would have considered going back with them. But like you just said, he'd be still doing it. He still wanted to pursue his classical training and get his master's degree. That was top priority.
How'd you guys all gel after, as you're recording the album and did your short UK tour? How was the situation with you, Lee, Randy, and Ozzy? Did you guys gel together? Or was there a lot of
we got
tension
on
the
great.
bus?
I mean, you can look at the photos in my book, and there are photos of us, doing silly things, and Ozzy and Lee were probably the most, I suppose, senior in as much as experience, and having Lee been all those years in Uriah Heep, and Ozzy all those years with Sabbath, and they were sort of kind of mates in that way. But Randy and I got on great. Lee and Randy got on great. Randy loved Lee, and he used to say, "Oh, if this ever changes, I want you to manage me." He used to say that
to Lee Kerslake.
But during that first that UK tour in 1980, we knew. So we had the album done, the very first album. And after we'd finished recording that first album, when we were sort of mixing and listening back to everything, we thought, hang on, there's something special going on here. We knew that we had a special product. And you see, during the recording of it, you don't really take as much notice. If you're in the eye of the hurricane, you just get on with it and do it. But when we sat back at the end of it, we thought, hang on, there's something special going on here, and it really was. It did gel, and it was a nice combination of chemistry and within the band. And then during that first UK tour, because we had success and the album was in the top 10, Ozzy and Sharon started pulling me aside during the tour and saying, "Let's get rid of Lee and let's get Tommy Aldrich." And I said, "No, no, this chemistry is working. The combination of everyone is just, why are you trying to fix something that's not broken?" And I wouldn't agree. And they kept on. And then when the tour finished, they took me to the Marquee in London to see Gary Moore play. And he had Tommy Aldrich playing with him. And at the end of the night, they were still saying to me, "Oh, isn't Tommy a great drummer?" I said, "Yeah, he is. He's a great drummer." I said, "But so's ours." I just wanted to establish that. I wouldn't agree. And it wasn't anything out of that blind loyalty to Lee or anything. I couldn't agree with something that I thought was a wrong move, so I wouldn't agree until it got to the point after the recording of Diary, they just got rid of us both and then asked me back, probably more or less knowing that I would accept because they knew that I liked working with Ozzy and Randy. I loved Lee as well, but he'd gone, and that was their way of getting rid of him and keeping me, was get rid of us both, and then ask me back. So,
and then they get rid of Tommy Aldridge on the Bark of the Moon tour.
Yeah,
and they brought it back again, didn't they?
Don't too, Jimmy.
That was what I couldn't understand. Tommy's forte is live stuff. I think he gets a little bit intimidated in the studio, and I don't know what, but sometimes he gets a bit flustered in the studio, and some of it was taking longer than normal to get the basic drum tracks. But
Carmen Appice, he told us they start off with Tommy recording the album, Then they brought in Carmine to touch up whatever drum tones or
I think there was a few. I think there was a few overdubbed cymbals or a few little overdubbed bits and pieces, but the meat and potatoes is all Tommy Aldridge.
Then Carmine tours with them, right?
Yeah. Then they get rid of him and bring Tommy back.
Yeah.
But I couldn't understand the getting rid of Tommy after he'd already done the album. When his forte is live stuff, they knew he'd be good live. And then when the tour comes, they get rid of him for that. It's a bit like shutting the gate after a horse got out.
So Jake's the new guy in the band. He's probably low key trying to feel he fits in. But what's Don Airy thinking about this? You're talking about a guy that's been around as long as you were at that point and seen everything. Yeah. Well, he must be scratching his head as well.
Oh yeah. Well, he wasn't at first. He only came in to do the tracks on the first album as a session sort of thing. He was still with Rainbow, so he came in just to do the few tracks that needed keyboards, and it gradually learned what it could be like in that camp.
Was Bob? Did you play the North American tour with on Bark at the Moon?
Yeah.
So we went to see it in Montreal, Canada. So you were there. Okay, you were there.
I believe.
Oh yeah. We did a world tour. It was, Europe, Scandinavia, British Isles, Japan, America, Canada, everywhere.
I remember when we saw Ozzy on Bark at the Moon, it was Tommy on drums. So they already got rid of Carmine. It was Tommy on drums. You were there. Don Airy was there. Ozzy, of course, was there, and Jake.
Right.
How was that tour overall? I mean, was it a good camaraderie on the bus? Was everybody gelling?
Well, the camaraderie situation was Ozzy and Sharon had one bus. And they had the nanny and kids on it sometimes. And our bus was just me and Jake and Carmine and Don Airy. So we had separate buses.
Mm-hmm.
Days off, sometimes we'd see each other, but it was it changed the dynamic of the band situation and the camaraderie when Ozzy had his wife managing him. So that, which is to be expected, I suppose, because it's changes the dynamic of the band having the missus there all the time.
Is that the tour where he snorted ants?
Wow, yeah. We had Motley Crue up. Yeah, we had Motley Crue.
Did you see that? Did you see the snorting of the ants?
I didn't see the snorting of the ants. No, I heard about it. And Motley Crue were a wild bunch of lads. They were just they were breaking the scene then. So they were just up and coming. They had that album, was it Shout at the Devil?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that was they were doing well, and they were on that tour with us the whole time. But we got on fine with them. They were nice guys and a bit crazy, but nice guys.
So if we get back to the what if, I mean, Kelly Rhoads did the foreword to your book, and he was convinced that he'd get back. Randy had tremendous respect for you, loved playing with you, and Kelly says it was in the plans that he would do something with you further on down the road. Is that correct?
Yes, that was the plan. Yeah, because I remember I met up with Ozzy and Sharon in a pub in London opposite our accountants in Thayer Street in London, and I was going to be going on the road with Uriah Heep, and Ozzy and Sharon were going back to restart the tour that they were part way through, and I think that was about the 16th or 17th of March, somewhere close to when Randy got killed, because I remember Sharon saying to me in that pub, she said, "Oh, Randy's really looking forward to seeing you," and because we were going to hook up when our paths crossed, with the Uriah Heep thing and the Ozzy tour. and we were going to hook up and, maybe on a day off get together and have some fun. Randy and I got on great together. He was the only one that phoned me when Lee and I were ousted. It was Randy that phoned me, and he said he was sorry that it had happened. And the only one out of all people involved, whether it was Jet Records officers or the road crew or Ozzy or anyone else, it was only Randy phoned me.
What kind of music would you have liked to do with Randy Rhoads? Okay, you're playing the heavy stuff with Ozzy, but would you have done the same thing?
Probably, yeah. It just sort of flowed out that way. We had similar kind of tastes in music and influences. He was into playing classical, but I'd been into classical music, and there was lots of pieces that I loved. That piece of music that Ozzy came on stage to, Carmina Burana, that was my idea. And the same with the music in the track Diary of a Madman. We had Lou Clark, who was the string arranger for ELO, who were also on Jet Records, and he came down. He was going to do the strings and choirs and stuff for Diary of a Madman. And I gave him a tape of Carmina Burana, that piece of music by Carl Orff. And I just said, look, when you do the choirs and strings and that, just think Carmina Burana for us. And that's what it did. It's got that Carmina Burana thing about it with, with that track Diary of a Madman. So Randy and I were on the same page there as well, really.
That track is a pure masterpiece as far as I'm concerned. It really demonstrates where I think where Randy was going on that track.
Well, yeah, that intro part is a piece called Etude that his classical teacher. So Randy used to seek out classical teachers when he went to different places, and the one at that time in England, he'd given him that Etude piece to practice as a part of his lesson.
And in French, it's étude.
What's that?
In French, it's étude.
Étude.
It's word. It's
oh right, yeah, étude.
It was a French. It was a French composer.
Yeah, it just means study.
It means study.
Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. We won't blame your accent.
And that influenced the whole intro of Diary. So.
You know what? I remember that, and he was sort of seeking. Weren't they with the family or somebody seeking royalties on that piece, that intro?
Oh, really? I didn't know about that. What for?
I'm wrong about that.
For so-called plagiarism.
Yeah. Well,
right.
I remember going on YouTube and they refer to that intro of Diary of the Madman and how it was sort of, I wouldn't say lifted, but the feeling was maybe it is lifted. I don't know. I don't know enough. But,
well, you can hear the influence if you listen to that YouTube.
Yeah.
And then you listen to the intro to Diary. You can hear the influence.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say, oh, that's a complete nick. He's used that part. They're similar in ways, and you can hear the influence, and it's as simple as that, really.
Yeah, it's a true masterpiece. I was listening to the drumming on Over the Mountain.
Oh yeah,
Lee Kerslake is just a monster. He
was perfect for the band.
Yeah.
Perfect for the band. We'd auditioned about 40 drummers or so before we got Lee, and we were down to just one more to audition, and that was Lee. And then Jet Records were saying to us, well, if you don't find a drummer soon, you're going to have to go into the studio and do the album with a session player, maybe somebody like Cozy Powell or somebody like that. And we said, no, we want the band completed, and we don't want any session players. We want the band as the band. Well, we went down to Shepperton Film Studios where we were going to audition Lee, because he'd been down there with he had a band. He was getting a band together called Blind Ambition, and he was down there anyway. So he came in, and he'd been given a tape of some of our songs that we'd written by that point, and the first one that he did was the song I Don't Know. And as soon as he started playing, Randy and I looked at each other, and this is the guy. We got it finally.
Finally.
after the audition, and we thought, yep, this is the guy. Because he had the aggression, he had the fire, but he had taste and sensitivity as well. And so, we're all sort of, we got our band now. And Randy was sort of dancing around saying, yeah, we got our band, we got our band, we got our... It was funny, yeah. But yeah, Lee was perfect for the band. He was the final piece of the puzzle.
So again, in your book, you had thought that maybe coming back from his classical studies, Randy might have done a blend between classical and rock and leading to something new.
That's a possibility too, because like I said, I can't see Randy ever sort of not playing rock again, because he'd been too into it. It was too much a part of him. He loved the classical part, and he was pursuing, and he wanted to get his master's degree, but I couldn't ever see him never playing rock again. He had his influences and his favorite players, and so many of them were rock players.
Yeah,
Leslie West.
Leslie West was a big influence. Richie Blackmore, Hendrix, Jimmy Page to a point, Brian May to a point.
I remember Kelly Garney told me how they used to laugh at Black Sabbath. When they were kids, they just thought they didn't really like Black Sabbath. They really
no, I know.
It was more of the Alice Cooper.
Yeah, they regarded it a little bit as a kind of tongue-in-cheek Spinal Tap sort of thing, the Sabbath thing, but that was just, you can't knock Sabbath because they broke so many new doors down. And,
yeah, of course.
But it just wasn't to their taste, and everybody's entitled to their opinion and their taste and what they do and don't like. So,
well, we could say he could have gone into the neoclassical rock world. We'll say he could have had a solo project with Bob Daisley because he liked him so much. He could have joined Quiet Riot, just back with his friends as they had some success, and maybe Quiet Riot would have lasted a lot longer if he was there.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of cool things that would have happened, but definitely he would have gone down in history. Just the first two albums put him in history, and I'm sure he had a lot more to offer because he was somebody who was hungry to learn, right? He would go on tour, but then he would take some courses while on tour so he can learn more.
Oh, sure. Music was the priority of Randy's life, which in those days it was all our, that's what we lived for. And it was, I could certainly see Randy doing solo projects and having hand-picked people on it, and whether I'd be one of them, possibly. Randy and I got on very well together. We liked each other, and we worked musically for sure.
All right. I think
that was heartbreaking. I've got to tell you, it was heartbreaking when that plane crashed. Well, I suppose you read about the how we found out in the book, and that
You're at a pub, right? You were at a pub.
No. We were actually in the air, flying from London to Houston with Uriah Heep when Randy was killed. And when we got to the hotel, we were playing the next night. We had that night off, the day we flew in. And then the next night we were supposed to play at a place called Cardi's in Houston, big club. So Lee and I went down there just to look at the gig. And as we were walking in, the girl on the door said, "Oh, you guys were with Ozzy, weren't you?" And she said, "I think some of them got killed in a plane crash this morning."
Oh boy,
that's what she said. I said, whoa, what's all this? I first envisaged this commercial jet airliner coming down with some of them in it, or there's been some kind of air disaster. So she said, "Go inside. The DJ knows more detail." So Lee carried on, and he walked into the bar, and I went and found the DJ. And I said, "Have you heard anything about this plane crash?" And he told me. He said, "Yeah, the seamstress Rachel was killed, and the pilot and Randy." oh man, it was just blew me away. And I went in and I sat next to Lee, and he looked at me and he said, "Carl," he said, "what's wrong with you? You've gone all pale." I said, "I just found out Randy got killed this morning." Well, Lee and I we just went back to the hotel then, and we sat in the bar and we drank toast to Randy and cried. It was just so sad, you know. Randy used to drink these exotic drinks like Golden Cadillac and grasshoppers and all these funny funny exotic cocktails. And so we drank those and toasted Randy and cried.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Bob, unless there's something else you want to add, thank you so much. Is there anything you're promoting?
What's going on in Mr. Bob Daisley's world these days?
I'm in the middle of doing another Hoochie Coochie Men blues album, and that'll have some nice guests on it. And a few years ago, I did the tribute to Gary Moore. I don't know if you've heard that one. Yeah, that turned out really well. It's got some great players on it.
Unbelievable.
You know, Doug Aldrich and John Sykes and Eric Singer and Glenn Hughes, and I was really pleased with that. And I wanted that album to be really, really well done for Gary's sake, because it was a tribute to somebody that had real talent. You know, Gary Moore, he was wonderful. You know, so. But the album turned out really, really well. So,
okay, well, good luck with the Hoochie Coochie Men.
Yeah.
And thank you for participating in our "What If Randy Rhoads Was Still With Us?"
Yeah, well, that's where I think he'd be and what he'd be doing. Probably doing some rock stuff, doing some solo stuff, doing some classical stuff, and I think it would be a combination of lots of things. And it's weird to imagine Randy being in his sort of late 60s now.
Oh, yeah.
That's one thing when you die young, you stay young forever, don't you?
Yeah.
In people's minds and vision.
Yeah. Well, his music lives on, right? His music lives on.
Their
music lives on too.
That's he'll always be alive in that. Well, I suppose we all will, really, in those albums, because I feel very privileged and honoured to be having been a part of them, and very proud of them.
It's so amazing.
You should be.
It's so amazing, you know, Bob. I was a young kid, and I had Blizzard of Ozz, and I used to turn in the back, and I see you. And at least the credits for you in that picture, right? With you, Lee, and Ozzy, and there you go. Flip it. No, for Blizzard. Do you have Blizzard there?
Bob's
there it is.
Bob's over
here. What gig was that? Was that an empty hall, or was it when they took that?
No, that was from a real gig.
Okay.
That was that was from the UK. Wait a minute. Let me think. I'm trying to think how that photo would be the back of the album. Is that the back of the album, or is it the
Blizzard?
Yeah, the back.
Blizzard.
Yeah.
The Blizzard of Ozz.
Wait a minute. Maybe I know, because that came out in the US later than it did in the UK. When the album was released in the UK, it had a picture of us on the back taken at this castle, not Clearwell Castle, a castle in outside. Sorry.
Well, I know which one you're talking. I know the pictures.
Yeah. Well, that's the UK version. So that would have been released when we went on the tour to promote it. But by the time it came out in America, they had photos of the UK tour. So that photo would have been taken on the UK tour.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you were replaced. And then the next time you're just replaced completely with Rudy and Tommy.
Pictures. And then the next two albums, you weren't even credited for anything. Ozzy wrote all the music, though.
Oh, yeah.
And you weren't even thanked on The Ultimate Sin. They thanked everybody under the sun except Bob Daisley.
Fucking took the garbage out and swept the floor. Got to thank you.
Yeah. I was just looking at the inside sleeve, and you're 100% right. Everybody was thanked except Bob Daisley, who wrote much of the music. So
that's right.
Oh well.
Oh, whoops!
We'll call that life experience.
Yeah. No, whoops! We left you off.
All right, Bob, have yourself a wonderful day.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure to talk to you, lads.
Stay well, stay healthy.
Yeah, blessings to you both.